Hello, everyone. Jack Sullivan, Director of Training for the Emergency Responder Safety Institute, coming to you today from Central Virginia. And I'll be talking today about roadway operations, safety, and survival. More importantly, for this particular group, I'm going to talk about how you can include this subject in all of your emphasis on community risk reduction. So let's get started. I got started on this particular subject back in March of 1998 when 10 of our personnel were struck by the tractor trailer you see in this picture on the Pennsylvania Turnpike while they were working what at that time was called just a routine call. A single car that spun off the highway ended up in the ditch line. They responded to a motor vehicle crash, were working that crash, had been there for a short period of time when the tractor trailer approaching the scene lost control, hit the assistant chief's vehicle on the side of the road, overturned on its side, and kind of swiped through the rest of the incident scene, in total striking 8 firefighters and 2 EMTs. Firefighter Dave Good did not survive the incident in March of 1998, and that is one of the reasons why I got involved with this particular subject. I had retired from that particular department as a lieutenant and safety officer a little while before this incident actually occurred. So I wasn't at the incident scene, but certainly knew everybody that was involved and kind of felt like there was some things that needed to be done to address our response to high-speed limited access highways. In 1998, the fire service really wasn't talking about that subject. It wasn't on our radar screen, and only a very few fire departments around the country had started to address that situation. So that's how I got started on this particular subject. And yet today we continue to hear example after example after news story after news story of emergency vehicles being struck by vehicles on a regular basis on all kinds of roads and highways. This is not just an issue for high-speed limited access highways. This exposure or hazard exists in almost any kind of environment that you can think of where you might be operating as a fire or EMS provider at a motor vehicle crash, at a fire scene, at the scene of a medical assist, a brush fire, a structure fire, any of those things that we do on a routine basis and that we sometimes become a little complacent about, our personnel are going to be in harm's way from being struck by a vehicle. And many times I hear the comment, it was just a routine call after a struck by incident occurs. We also refer to these incidents as secondary crashes. So in many cases, our personnel are responding to a motor vehicle crash or other emergency. They position their emergency vehicles at the scene, regardless of what agency or discipline they represent, and go about their business. And unfortunately, some of those vehicles, very often the ones that are used for blockers, are often struck by other motorists who are either not paying attention or are distracted by something in their vehicle or having a conversation with somebody or for whatever reason not paying attention to where they're going or having good situational awareness about the other vehicles on the roadway around them. So very often we hear people say, but it was just a routine call. Keep that in mind as you work with your personnel to make sure that they're prepared to respond to road and highway incidents. It happens across all disciplines. It's not just fire and EMS. It affects law enforcement on a regular basis while they're making traffic stops or investigating something that's part of their duties. We see it repeated over and over and over again where police vehicles are struck, and very often the troopers or police officers that are associated with those vehicles. It happens to safety service patrols. We have Department of Transportation safety service patrols operating all across the country. Their primary job is to help with incident management and do temporary traffic control at incident scenes, which means they're on the front lines of trying to get the message to approaching drivers and motorists that there's an incident up ahead and what action they should take to safely pass the scene if, in fact, the road is still open. It also happens to towing and recovery operators in very large numbers, as you'll see in just a minute. And we got to remember, we keep hearing people say, but it was just a routine job. It was a disabled vehicle on the shoulder of the road. I was just there to pick it up. And yet many times these tow operators are being struck and injured or struck and killed in the line of their duty to get a job done anywhere near moving traffic. So we've got to remember that these incidents can occur just about anywhere. And this is an example that I'll show you of what the folks on the incident scene would tell you was just a routine call initially. It was one car that spun out on the roadway and ended up on the side of the road, as you see here. The video that you're about to see is being shot from the front cab of an ambulance that was dispatched to the scene. They've ascertained that the victim is okay. They're waiting for the police officers to arrive. Let's see what happens.
You can show me clear from this accident on
So in this particular case, you can tell the roads are snow covered and slippery. The pickup truck that struck the ambulance is traveling too fast for those conditions, attempts to steer past the incident scene, but loses control of his truck. Notice the position of the providers and where they're standing, how they're outfitted. They're not wearing any high visibility gear. They don't appear to recognize the hazard area that they might be standing in, and they're not taking the appropriate precautions that we would normally recommend. It was just a routine traffic crash that they responded to until the secondary crash occurred, and then it wasn't so routine after all. None of the responders were struck and injured in this particular case, but it could have been very different. We get reports on almost a daily basis from around the country of struck-by incidents occurring involving fire apparatus, EMS ambulances, fire police vehicles in the Northeast, police cars, tow trucks, safety service patrols. I could literally spend hours talking about case studies of these struck-by incidents that occur on a routine basis daily throughout our country. These days, you're not even safe on the front apron of your fire station, and this is just one example of a fire engine that was parked on the front apron of a fire station that was struck by a vehicle that was involved with a crash nearby, got deflected off the roadway and into the front apron and hit the fire engine hard enough that they're still not sure whether they're actually going to be able to repair that unit. It may have to be totaled because of the damage to the frame underneath, yet to be determined. You're not even safe standing on the front apron of your fire station or EMS rescue squad department. Many times these incidents involve multiple emergency vehicles. In this particular incident from 2019 up in New Jersey, on I-280, the dump truck that you see in the center of the picture here entered into an incident scene at high speed, struck several police cars that you see on the right, continued on, struck an ambulance, pushed it into a fire engine, and then overturned onto its side, involving another one of the civilian vehicles at the same time. This could have been a disaster. Fortunately, none of the responders were struck and injured or killed in this particular case, but under different circumstances, we could have had multiple fatalities or injuries to the responders working the original primary incident scene. This incident here kind of helps us to raise the question, are these really routine calls? This was a tractor trailer fire in North Carolina near Salisbury on Interstate 85 in 2020. They had been on the scene in the middle of the night for quite a while. Because of the remote location and the amount of fire involved with the tractor trailer, they brought in some tanker trucks. One particular fire department, Miller's Ferry Fire Department, had 3 apparatus on scene parked in a blocking position, meaning they were positioned on an angle upstream of the actual incident area. All 3 of those apparatus were struck by a tractor trailer coming at the incident scene after they had been on location for a substantial period of time and struck 3 of the fire apparatus, actually totaling all 3 of the apparatus. One minor injury to one firefighter that was on the scene. This again could have been a disaster, but everything turned out to be okay, other than the financial loss incurred with the loss of apparatus in this particular case. So we got to remember these things are happening almost on a daily basis. For years, the folks in the Department of Transportation and road construction fields have been telling us we should follow the MUTCD, the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, on how to set up our incident areas following the recommendations, procedures, and protocols that they call for pre-planned work zones. And yet I sit on a committee for the National Committee of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, and I can tell you this is an active discussion that we have on a regular basis, because all of those things that we use in the way of pre-planned work zones, attenuator trucks, arrow boards, advanced warning signs, cones, flares, barrels, all kinds of temporary traffic control devices, It doesn't seem to make a difference these days. We actually have people running into these attenuator trucks like they never saw them. We sometimes wonder why they can't see our fire trucks and ambulances on the highway. If they can't see a bright amber flashing arrow and an attenuator truck with advanced warning signs and cones deployed, we have a long way to go before they're going to see our trucks and apparatus and emergency vehicles out on the roadway. So that's not the answer these days either. Here's a perfect example of those types of drivers that we have to be concerned about that we refer to as D drivers. In this particular case, watch the driver approach the back of a DOT vehicle with an attenuator and a large flashing arrow board. Notice just before she runs into the vehicle that her left turn signal comes on, and she could have moved into the center lane of the road that you're looking at, except she didn't. And she didn't slow down and stop before she ran into the truck. And this is what we see on a regular basis. I'm going to loop this a second time so you can see it again. Notice the lane next to her is free and clear and open. She could have easily turned left and avoided running into the truck, or she could have slowed down and or stopped, and yet she continued on and ran into the back of the attenuator truck. These are the kind of people that we're dealing with on a regular basis. Over the last 3 years, since January 1st of 2019, and as of this week, we've had 138 emergency responders struck and killed by vehicles someplace in the country. 56 of those personnel were law enforcement officers. 57 of them were in the towing and recovery business. 20 were in fire and EMS, and 5 were safety service patrol operators. The activities that these folks were involved with at the time, the most significant category was disabled vehicle incidents, and that's primarily related to law enforcement and the towing and recovery industry, sometimes the safety service patrols also. 39 of the fatalities occurred at the scene of a motor vehicle crash. 13 involved law enforcement on traffic stops. 12 other law enforcement activities, searches, citizens' complaints that they were investigating, or a variety of other things that law enforcement does day in and day out. 10 of those incidents involved police officers trying to deploy stop sticks to end a chase, or vehicular assaults where the driver of a vehicle on purpose ran into a law enforcement officer, striking and killing them. 4 of the fatalities were related to removing debris from the roadway. 3 of them occurred at fire scenes, and 2 were EMS standbys that were considered to be non-emergency incidents, where they were at a public event of some sort. Our vehicle went out of control, struck the EMTs, and in the process killed them. So that'll give you an idea of how serious a problem this is from our perspective and where we need your help. But because we're looking at it from a community risk reduction eye, I also want to call your attention to those drivers who are running into blocking apparatus and or emergency vehicles at an incident scene, and consequently are either seriously injured or in some cases killed, as in this example from Delaware in 2019. Personnel from fire, EMS, and law enforcement were at the scene of a motor vehicle crash, had been there for an extended period of time. When the car that you see in this picture approached the scene at a high rate of speed and ran into the back of the blocking tower truck, the driver was a fatality in this particular case. So we have to remember that what we do on the roads and highways also has an impact on the other motorists that are out there. It's not just fire and EMS. Like I said before, some of these safety service patrol operators are out there providing temporary traffic control at incident scenes. And in this incident in 2019, a motorist drifted onto the left shoulder of the highway near an incident scene, struck the back of a safety service patrol truck. The driver died, and the passenger on that vehicle had serious injuries. The safety service patrol operator would tell you it was just a routine call or assignment. It's the kind of thing they do multiple times a day in a variety of different circumstances. And yet in this particular case, the driver either wasn't paying attention or didn't see the activity, ran into an emergency vehicle, and as a result was killed in the incident. This year, in January, in South Carolina, we had a civilian who was killed after running into a parked fire truck blocking an incident scene on I-95. And I could give you numerous examples where these types of incidents have occurred, where people are just not paying attention to what they're doing in the driver's seat. And that's part of what we need to address. As I was preparing to deliver this particular presentation this week, the 22nd of September, in Florida, we got a report of a driver that struck two of the fire units that you see in this picture and a fire lieutenant at the scene of a motor vehicle crash. The striking driver died in the crash, and the lieutenant on the fire unit has critical injuries. She's considered to be stable at the moment at the time of this recording, but has a long road ahead of her with medical procedures and rehab in order to get back to her normal lifestyle and her job in the fire department. Here's another example that we need to be thinking about. As we're working on the highway, I very often hear people say, well, why don't we just shut the road down? If we close all the lanes, that'll solve the problem. Unfortunately, that's not the case. We have to remember that emergency vehicles that we've summoned to the scene still have to gain access to the incident scene. And very often they have to do that in the direction of travel of traffic approaching the incident scene. We all know that when we're working at an incident scene, we tend to create a backlog or a queue of traffic while we're from our incident scene back, in some cases, many miles. This particular situation in 2019 in Colorado, a tractor trailer with a driver not paying attention again, literally ran into a series of vehicles stopped in the backlog for another incident scene at a high rate of speed and killed a number of people when he ran into the stopped traffic. So we have to remember that everything we do on the roadway has an impact not only on our incident scene, but on the other drivers that may still be able to move near or around our incident scene. And more importantly, to those drivers who are stuck in traffic, in some cases parked for an extended period of time in the backlog or the queue, they're subject to injury or fatalities from vehicles approaching who are not paying attention and not seeing the congestion ahead. So we need to keep all of these things in mind. When we're talking about community risk reduction, it's not just for our personnel in this case. We're also talking about the drivers involved with the original incident that were responding to help in the first place, the other motorists around the incident scene, and those who might be stuck in the queue or the backlog, sometimes many miles from the actual initial incident scene. The drivers that we're concerned about, we refer to as D drivers. They're drunk, they're drugged, and those drugs sometimes are legal, sometimes they're illegal. We have many drivers out there who are drugged with over-the-counter medication that they're not using appropriately. We have drivers who are drowsy, disgruntled, distracted, disturbed, disrespectful. They really don't care what kind of uniform you're wearing or what you're doing in the way of traffic control. We have drivers that we refer to as drag racers who are traveling too fast for weather conditions or road conditions at certain times. We now have to worry about some vehicles that are driverless. I'm sure you've all heard of examples where Teslas in autopilot mode have driven into the back of emergency vehicles when the driver in the front seat was not paying attention and was not involved with the driving function of the vehicle. So now we've got to be worried about autonomous, or what I refer to sometimes as semi-autonomous vehicles coming into our incident scenes and creating an even bigger hazard for our personnel operating on those scenes. We've always had drivers that were dangerous that we've had to deal with. And in some cases, as I've just shown you in the last couple of examples, we now have to deal with some drivers who are dead after they've run into the emergency scene or the vehicles at the emergency incident itself. A couple of years ago in 2018, the Emergency Responder Safety Institute gathered a group of people together in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to review the last 20 years of traffic incident management and roadway incident safety and survival activities. The idea was to see what have we done that's working well, what do we still need to work on that hasn't been done so well, and what's the vision for the future for at least the next 5 to 10 years. The report is available to you for free off our website at the URL in this particular slide. And I will provide a handout to the conference organizers so that they can share that with you at some time. So what has been successful? When we talk about the last 20 years of traffic incident management, roadway incident safety, we can certainly say we now have a growing cadre of TIM champions that are out there. Individuals in all disciplines across the board and around the country who are interested in addressing this subject, educating their fellow responders about strategies and tactics to avoid being struck by a vehicle and to protect our apparatus. And those folks who are helping to get that message out to those people who are working on the roadways and those motorists who are trying to operate on the roadways around our incident scenes. There certainly is better recognition of the importance of traffic incident management. We've had some success with legislative initiatives like move over laws and now hands-free laws. In Maryland, you have a hands-free law where you're not supposed to be holding a phone while you're driving. Problem is, if these laws are on the books and we can't enforce them for a variety of different reasons, are they really a law? Laws are only really laws when they're enforced. And if they're not enforced, people tend to ignore them. We have some work to do in the enforcement of some of the laws that are out there. We also do a better job now of identifying and sharing recommended practices, better ways to do advanced warning, blocking at an incident scene, deploying temporary traffic control devices, participating in traffic incident management committees, collaborating, communicating, and cooperating between different disciplines so that law enforcement and firefighters are not fighting at an incident scene about the positioning of emergency vehicles, that everybody is working in a cooperative and collaborative type environment to get the same job done as quickly as possible, to clear the incident as quickly as possible, protect the responders during that process, protect the other motorists on the roadways around us, and get the roadway back to its full operating capacity as quickly as possible. So when we talk about things that have been done well and what we need to be talking to our providers and firefighters about is making sure that we've got the appropriate number and type of units dispatched to various types of incidents on roads and highways. When our apparatus arrives at the scene, we want it parked and angled in a blocking position in the appropriate lanes. We don't want to necessarily close every lane in that particular area if, in fact, we can create a safe area to work and still allow traffic to proceed by the incident scene in a safe manner at a safe speed. The front wheels of those blocking apparatus should be turned away from the work area, and we need to make sure that we deploy wheel chocks on a regular basis. Let's use a little emergency lighting discipline. The emergency lighting packages that are available in emergency vehicles today, the LED packages, are extremely bright, especially at nighttime and in low light conditions. And I'll talk about this subject in a little bit more detail shortly. All of the emergency units responding to the incident scene should be positioned on one side of the roadway or the other. We don't want emergency vehicles scattered all across the roadway on both shoulders and maybe even on the opposite lane of travel on the other side if we can avoid it. EMS units, ambulances, should be positioned with the loading area protected from oncoming traffic. We should encourage our personnel to exit apparatus on the side away from traffic whenever possible, with the enclosed cabs that we have on most fire apparatus these days. And we need to make sure that they're aware of what we refer to as the zero buffer, that area where your blocking apparatus comes closest to those passing vehicles that may still be able to pass safely by the incident scene. We want to make sure our personnel are wearing the appropriate personal protective equipment, including high visibility garments and or your turnout gear, depending on the type of activity you're involved with and the action that you're taking at the incident scene. We've also seen improved use of temporary traffic control devices like cones and signs and flares, emergency lighting, the use of vehicles, as you'll see in a few minutes, for temporary traffic control and other things. So things are improving and we're doing a better job of communicating with our firefighters and EMTs. We need to remember that sometimes we have to explain to the motoring public why we do some of the things that we do on the roadway while we're out there operating at incident scenes. That helps them to understand. We encourage all fire departments to be involved with local and regional TIM committees, or task groups as they're sometimes called in some areas of the country. When we get the different disciplines together and talk about these incidents on a regular basis, we get much more buy-in from everybody, a more coordinated response to incidents on the roadway, and a more effective operation for everybody all the way around. If your fire department is not already participating in one of these TIM committees, I recommend that you seek out and find out if there's a TIM committee operating in your particular neighborhood or region, and make sure that you assign a member of the department to participate in those TIM meetings or task groups. Typically, they run about every quarter. Some places do it more frequently, and other places do it less frequently. But in most areas of the country, somewhere near you, there should be a TIM committee, especially in those large metropolitan areas with large traffic concerns anyway. When we talk about TIM committees, the benefits that we're trying to Encourage is to facilitate collaboration on pre-plans, on training and coordination of resources. It's important for all disciplines to understand the staffing and response times and protocols that other disciplines are going to follow when they're dispatched to help us at an incident scene. We also encourage collaboration with after-action reviews, and not just for those incidents where things don't work out so well, but to take advantage of those incidents that work like a smooth, well-oiled machine and take that opportunity to use positive reinforcement to demonstrate those things that people did at the incident, why they worked well, and that you'd like to see it repeated on an ongoing basis. Don't miss the opportunity to use positive reinforcement in some of these after-action reviews. These committees will develop regional incident response procedures so that all the disciplines and all of the mutual aid departments will understand what you're going to do when you arrive at the scene and what they should do when they arrive at the scene. Sharing information about resources. Public safety agencies can assist with NIMS and ICS training for those personnel responding to traffic incidents that maybe don't have instructors readily available. The towing and recovery industry and Department of Transportation personnel can often use help with NIMS or ICS training so that they understand what is involved with incident command at an incident scene on the road or highway. There's a link here that will take you to information related to traffic incident management and a story, if you want to put it that way, a news report of the benefits of TIM committees that elaborates in more detail why we encourage your participation in TIM committees. When we look at what's been less successful over the last 20 years or so, we are very deficient right now in what we refer to as data collection. We do not have good systems in place nationwide to provide for uniform reporting of struck by or near miss incidents, or what we refer to as secondary crashes. It's being done in great detail in certain areas, and in other areas it's not being reported at all. Watch for improvements in this particular area coming up over the next couple of years, including a new webpage that should be on the respondersafety.com website before the end of this calendar year that will enable you to provide some basic information about a struck by or secondary crash event involving emergency vehicles. We have got to find a way to modify and improve motorist behavior. Those D drivers that I was talking about, we have to find a way to encourage them to change their behavior and drive in a more safe way. It's got to start at the very beginning for new drivers and the requirements that are out there for driver education or tests before a new person gets their driver's license for the first time. They're not the ones necessarily causing the problem. We have an awful lot of motorists that have been on the roads for years that are the most distracted drivers out there. But the bottom line is we have got to find a way to improve motorist behavior. And we need to find a way to ratchet up and improve the enforcement of existing traffic laws, whether it's related to move over or hands-free or the enforcement of speed limits or whatever, to make our scene safer. We need help in that area. We understand that law enforcement is short-staffed in a lot of situations, and they don't necessarily have all the resources they need to be able to enforce these traffic laws on a daily basis. But we've got to find a way to improve the enforcement of those existing traffic laws. So as we look to the future over the next 5 to 10 years, we've got to do a better job of collecting data, collecting it, analyzing it, sharing it, researching what we learned from that data related to struck by vehicle fatalities, injuries, near misses, the property damage costs that are associated, and the civilian injuries and fatalities across all disciplines related to striking emergency vehicles at incident scenes. One of the things we have no clue about these days are the number of emergency vehicles that are being struck and damaged, and in many cases totaled, and what the cost is that's associated with those property losses. When we start to build a picture where we can definitively say how many fatalities, injuries, near misses, and how many dollars worth of damaged vehicles have been involved, how many civilians have been injured or killed in secondary crashes at incident scenes, we'll get some of the resources and assistance we need from other folks who have been not necessarily unwilling, but not encouraged to step up to the plate and help us because they don't see this as being a big problem, because we don't have the data to prove to them that it in fact is a big problem. We need to continue training and education for our emergency responders and drivers. And we need to expand on that training and education, especially for our emergency responders. And in order to get number one and number two done on this list, we need funding to accomplish those goals. And it's got to come from somewhere. We don't necessarily know where that funding is going to come from or what we're going to do with data collection or training, but we know that these are the three things that have not worked out so well over the last 20 years that we really need to emphasize going forward. So when we say what data is missing, we need an accurate annual report of secondary crashes and struck-bys involving emergency responders and their vehicles and near misses. We need to know how many responders are struck and killed or injured each year, and we need to somehow or other track the serious disabling injuries that very often don't get the attention that they should within our own disciplines or even in the news media, and the costs associated with them. So we know of a number of incidents where emergency responders have been seriously injured with amputations or traumatic brain injuries, have not been able to return to their formal job as an emergency responder, and have a lifelong series of health conditions that they have to deal with for the remainder of their lives that drastically change their lifestyle. We don't have a full understanding of what the numbers are, what the costs are, and how many people are involved in these incidents nationwide on an annual basis. We need help in this area. We've been encouraging the federal government to step up and assist us. We're starting to get a little bit of their attention. We still have a long way to go. What are the total costs associated with property damage to emergency vehicles? You take a fairly new ladder truck and put it out as a blocking unit on a highway, and it gets hit by a tractor trailer traveling at highway speeds. Very often that ladder truck becomes a totaled vehicle. It cannot return to service as an emergency vehicle. It has to be scrapped and needs to be replaced with another vehicle. What are the costs associated with that? We know that insurance companies very often will not provide coverage for the actual value or for the replacement value of those vehicles. They'll only give you what they determine to be the actual value of those vehicles in the crash, if in fact the striking driver even had insurance. In many cases, the cost of the damage to the emergency vehicles has to be taken care of by the municipality, city, county, or whoever the department is that was involved. And we need better analysis of the causal factors and research for better solutions to protect our personnel and the general public at roadway incidents. When we talk about training improvements, we have to continue to expand traffic incident management and responder safety training. We need to focus on those new responders that are coming into the business and those that have not been trained yet. We also need to make sure that we're providing annual refresher training for all personnel. That annual refresher training might include annual analysis of local, state, and national data or case studies, a review of local and regional protocols and procedures, an update maybe on new information and technology, or a review of actual case studies and how those case studies might be similar to operations within your own department. We have got to address some topics beyond the basic 4-hour traffic incident management class designed and provided by the federal government, the Federal Highway Administration. That training at this point in 2021 is almost 10 years old, and it hasn't really been updated substantially since the beginning. There is plenty of additional information related to traffic incident management and roadway incident safety that needs to be provided. We have put together a series of almost 45 online training modules at Responder Safety that can help you keep up with training and provide new information that isn't necessarily included in the 4-hour TIM class. All of the training and materials that are available on the respondersafety.com website are free. We have put them together using funding provided by grants from the U.S. Fire Administration and from other entities over the last 20 years. There is no cost to anybody to use any of the material or take any of the training that's available on our website for free for all responders. And we need to increase the number and the quality of multi-agency after-action reviews. We don't do them often enough, and very often we don't use them as an opportunity for positive reinforcement. D-drivers are an epidemic, maybe even a pandemic, I guess, in some cases. We've talked about them already, those that are drunk, drugged, drowsy, disgruntled, distracted, dangerous, driverless. These are the folks that we need to address. We have to come up with some kind of a vaccine for D drivers. I don't know whether that's possible or not, but we have to demand change and social justice when it comes to helping to improve the situation and protect our emergency responders working at roadway incidents. We need to hold D drivers accountable. Where possible, we need to prevent them from driving. We have to certainly report them when we observe them out on the roadways, and we have to do our best to assist law enforcement by testifying in court or helping them to do their job to bring those D drivers to justice. It's people who are killing our responders. It's not tractor trailers. It's not cars. It's not pickup trucks. It's the people who are operating those vehicles who are not paying attention or driving when they're impaired, who are striking and killing or injuring our responders. We have got to focus in that area, especially for you folks that are involved with community risk reduction. We have put together a whole series of materials related to public information officers and public education and outreach so that you can use them to communicate with drivers and the public. Once again, they're free. They're available at the Emergency Responder Safety Institute under the PIO and Public Education Resources, and the International Association of Chiefs of Police have put together what they call a Safe Quick Clearance Traffic Incident Toolkit that's also available to you for free that helps to promote move over and hand-free laws and the appropriate type of driving that we wish drivers would follow when they're out on the roadways. Some of those resources that we've created that are available to you are, for example, this video clip that's available on how to safely pass an emergency scene. It only runs about 4 minutes. You can download it off of our website for free, use it in community relations meetings, educating the public, school visits, whatever opportunity you have to get in front of the public. These videos are available to you for free to use any way you find that's useful. We have a video on Move It. If your vehicle is involved in a relatively minor crash with no injuries, we want to encourage you to move that vehicle out of the operating lanes of traffic and onto the shoulder, side street, parking lot, wherever we can get you away from moving traffic as quickly as possible. And this particular PSA addresses that issue. We have another PSA that's been very popular over the last 10 years about move over. And there are a series of other video PSAs that are out there. This one here that I'm going to show you is one of the most popular ones that we've created. It's called Just Leave Your Phone Alone.
Passing a vehicle crash? Keep your eyes on the traffic. Leave your phone alone. No photos, no video, no social media posting. Respect the victims, protect the responders, and save yourself. Leave your phone alone.
So these PSAs are available on our website. You can use them in your social media campaigns, meetings with the general public, whichever way you can find to make use of them. They're there for your use.
Passing a vehicle.
Download them and use them any way you can. We also have handouts or push cards, as we call them. This is one that's two-sided. You're seeing both sides here. It's the move over, slow down push card. You can hand these out in a variety of different ways. And in some cases, we've actually had our personnel set up shop at some rest stops on high visibility roadways, especially during holiday weekends when there's a lot of travelers. We'll set up a kiosk and our personnel will be there to hand out material and talk to people about the issue of responder safety at roadway incidents and how they should respond to emergency vehicles on the roadway. The emergency vehicles that are approaching them from the rear, responding to an incident, and what they should do when they see emergency vehicles parked at an incident scene. We've had a lot of success in Maryland with putting some of our personnel out at these rest stops and communicating with the public. We encourage it, and maybe you folk can find a way to help us do even more of these in your community risk reduction efforts. We have to make the best use of technology, and technology is changing on a regular basis. These are just some of the items that I talk about in our training classes when we talk about strategies and tactics for fire and EMS. Electronic flares have gotten much better from a technology standpoint. They may be a better solution for you now than chemical style flares. Some fire departments in some areas of the country are now using portable speed bumps to slow down traffic as they approach an incident scene so that they never get above 45 miles an hour going by an incident. Even 45 miles an hour is pretty quick when you're standing out on the roadway, but it's still better than traffic passing us at 70, 75, 80, or even faster speeds. Arrows and message boards that can be mounted on fire apparatus and emergency vehicles to help direct traffic in the direction we want them to go in order to safely pass an incident scene. There's an app out there called What 3 Words, and you may or may not be familiar with this, but these folks have taken every part of the globe and chopped it into little 6-foot by 6-foot squares. You can literally determine the exact location of a person within 6 feet by sending them a text message and asking them to respond to it by point and click. When they do that, they send back 3 words that you can then pinpoint on a map to show exactly where they are located. This could be a phenomenal tool for us to use on interstates and high-speed limited access highways where we have a lot of travelers from out of the area passing through our response districts who aren't familiar with the landmarks, the exits, the milepost signs, and things like that. When they call 911 to report an incident, we literally could have a 911 dispatcher or a call taker send them a text message at their phone number and ask them to point and click on that message to send back to the call taker or dispatcher an exact location of where they're located on a road or highway or in some other area that maybe they just can't give you a definitive street address for. If you're not familiar with this app, take a look at it. I think you'll find that there are ways we could make better use of What 3 Words in emergency services. And then, of course, digital alerting technology, which is becoming more and more frequent at this point. It's a cost-efficient way of having a parked emergency vehicle send out a signal that's interpreted and reported in navigation apps that you might use as you're traveling around the area. So a lot of people are familiar with the Waze app, Google Maps, Apple Maps, any kind of navigation tool that you might use, TomTom in some cases. Some of these digital alerting systems actually send information to a cloud that reports information about stopped emergency vehicles in the roadway. And that message then gets delivered to the motorist approaching an incident scene by way of the navigation app on their vehicle. And soon, we hope, just through the infotainment system on some of the newer vehicles that are out there on the street today. So watch for this type of technology to grow in popularity as time goes on. Here's 2 examples of digital alerting technology that are available today. Probably Haas Alert is the biggest one that's out there, but there's also others like Digital Siren who do various types of alerting for motorists to give them an idea about emergency vehicles operating near where they're located or traveling to at the time. Take a look if you're not familiar with these systems and get up to speed on what kind of technology is available and how it can help provide for safer incident scenes for our personnel and for the motorists on the roadway too. When that signal is delivered by the emergency vehicle, either traveling to an emergency or parked at an emergency scene, it comes back and can be downloaded easily into these apps and give an audible warning to the driver that there's an emergency vehicle ahead or an emergency scene ahead, or in some cases, that an emergency vehicle is approaching their location from a particular direction. Technology is improving on a daily basis. Fire department-based traffic control units are starting to become more popular. Now, we've seen these for years in the northeast part of the country, and probably some even in Maryland, but at the same time, we have a lot of places around the country where fire police are not in existence. We don't have fire department members who are providing for traffic control at incident scenes everywhere. So we like to educate others about the fire police model, or what one fire department that I'll show you in a second calls their emergency services unit. These vehicles, operated by fire police officers whose only job is to provide crowd control and traffic control at emergency scenes, are equipped like safety service patrol trucks with high visibility arrow boards or message boards, all kinds of temporary traffic control equipment, and more importantly, the personnel needed to deploy that equipment properly at an incident scene. The fire police model is a good one, especially when members are well trained and well equipped to do that particular job. So here's just a couple of examples of some of these vehicles that are out there. Actually, some of these have now been replaced by even more modern versions of the fire police vehicle. in House Springs, South Carolina, these folks had a wrap done on their vehicle that they purchased for temporary traffic control to emphasize the move over law in South Carolina. Loveland Sims Fire Department in Ohio, which Chief Billy Goldfitter is from, has what he calls his emergency services unit. Now, the Loveland Sims Fire Department is a career fire department. They do not have volunteer firefighters on staff, but this emergency services unit is a volunteer component of the fire department. These folks are all community residents who are trained especially to do a variety of different jobs or tasks for the fire department, including temporary traffic control at incident scenes. They're properly trained, they're properly equipped, they have their own vehicle with all the tools necessary to set up a temporary traffic control zone at an incident scene, while career staff is addressing the actual incident that they were dispatched to respond to in the first place. We did a podcast with Billy not too long ago that's available for free on the Responder Safety website that explains the emergency services unit, what it takes to become a member, what training they go through, and the services they provide. This is an excellent model for other career departments or combination departments to consider where they need help, especially on roadways of all types. In Grand Rapids, Michigan, the fire department up there was one of the first out of the block almost 10 years ago, developing their blocking unit that they refer to as Utility 2. They actually purchased a dump truck from the Public Works Department in the city, converted it into fire apparatus, painting it, adding the reflective decals and stripes on it, warning lights and a siren, an arrow board on the back end, and then the Michigan DOT folks stepped in and offered to provide, by leasing, an attenuator trailer for them to pull behind this dump truck. The key here was they were looking for a vehicle that was not as expensive as frontline fire apparatus, so that if a D driver was actually going to run into something, that it would run into something that would not cost the city as much money and would be a better tool for absorbing a crash than a full-size fire truck. So the attenuator trailer is designed to be hit by a vehicle. It absorbs the energy from that crash and in many cases causes less damage to the striking vehicle and helps prevent injuries and death to the people who run into it. This has been a very successful program for Grand Rapids. When the trailer is hit, if it's been hit, and it has been several times over the 10 years, it's actually replaced the same day with a new trailer because it's a leased agreement that when the trailer is hit, it's replaced with another one. The provider is right there in their city. So this has been a great solution for them up there. Here's something you don't see very often. I doubt you've seen it yet in Maryland, but maybe we'll see more of this as time goes on. So that's the Zeeland Township, Michigan Fire Department blocker unit responding on the first alarm, the initial alarm for a motor vehicle crash on a roadway. They responded as an emergency vehicle. They used this to set up temporary traffic control devices and to act as the primary blocking vehicle. What they're trying to do is to protect not only the responders at the incident scene, but also the frontline fire apparatus at the incident scene. In North Carolina, this particular department, New Bern, purchased a specific purpose-designed truck for temporary traffic control. It has an arrow board, it has an attenuator stinger on the back, and temporary traffic control devices in the bed. When they operate out on the highway, they take one person and respond this truck to act as their advanced warning vehicle and to, again, provide protection for their frontline apparatus and their personnel that are operating at the incident scene. We're starting to see this be repeated more often now. In Sioux Falls, they took a little bit different approach. They got an attenuator trailer with the arrow board attached to it. It's typically pulled by the utility vehicle you see in this photograph. But at the same time, if that utility vehicle is already out on another assignment or not available for some reason, this is designed so it can be pulled by any vehicle in the fleet in that particular fire department. And if necessary, they can actually drop the Scorpion trailer and leave it at an incident scene and put the apparatus that pulled it to the scene back in service as quickly as possible. Also, a very innovative, good way to address advanced warning and temporary traffic control at an incident scene. In Irving, Texas, Victor Conley, the fire chief there, a few years ago, almost 5 years ago now, did a study and determined that his reserve apparatus, if they sent it to auction, as many fire departments do at the end of the lifetime of those frontline pieces, they typically only got somewhere between $3,500 and $5,000 at auction for that old fire truck. He decided to try an experiment and convert them into traffic management blocker units. And what you're seeing here is blocker 12. It's one of 5 blocker units in the department that they will drive with one operator to an incident scene, set this truck up on an angle with the arrow boards on both sides and the rear illuminated to help direct traffic around an incident scene. The idea being is that if somebody runs into that particular vehicle, that it's not going to damage a frontline piece. And in fact, these vehicles have been hit a number of times, protecting the frontline apparatus and the personnel operating at the incident scene. Other fire departments have started to follow the same example. And in Texas, these are 2 more examples. The Snyder Fire Department up top used an old tanker that wasn't good for holding water anymore to use it as a temporary traffic control blocker unit at incident scenes. And in Grand Prairie, Texas, just within the last year, they took 2 of their reserve apparatus and installed these collapsible Stinger units on the back, attenuator pads, and added arrow devices on each side. Their intent is to use these vehicles as their blocker vehicles to protect the frontline apparatus and the responders at the incident scenes. One of the other areas I'm going to cover briefly is our emergency warning lights and how we use them to communicate with drivers. And I think everybody can relate, if you've been in this business for any length of time at all, that the LED warning light packages that are available in emergency vehicles these days are extremely bright and distracting, especially at nighttime and in low light conditions. We need to think about how we're using our emergency warning lights and maybe take some steps to improve their effectiveness at protecting incident scenes and not creating more of a glare hazard as we see in some situations. So we're looking at the intensity of these warning lights, the frequency of the flash, the latency or modulation of those flashes, and the various colors of warning lights that are out there. We've just completed a study done by a couple of researchers at Embry-Riddle University down in Daytona, Florida. They did a study with civilians driving past incident scenes with a variety of different types of emergency warning light configurations and intensities to determine what the best methodology is for emergency warning lights in daylight and nighttime type conditions. The draft of the report has been sent to the U.S. Fire Administration, who provided the money to conduct the testing and study, and we hope to have that made public before the end of this calendar year. The information will be useful and will help you understand why we're starting to recommend situations like you see here. So this fire truck is equipped with a new emergency lighting package that, under normal conditions when responding to an emergency, the warning lights operate the same way we're all used to, at a very fast flash frequency at a very high intensity. But when they put this fire unit in park, it changes the type of flash pattern and reduces the intensity of the flash pattern to take into consideration the ambient lighting conditions at nighttime and in low light conditions. So when you're responding to an incident, we get all the regular flash that we normally do, but when you set the parking brake, it reduces the intensity of the lights and changes the flash pattern to outline better the fire apparatus. So when we're responding, we get the high visibility, fast flash, and high intensity. And when we park, it sets the brake. When you set the brake, it reduces the flash pattern and the intensity of it and outlines the parked truck better. It's easier for approaching traffic to identify what's going on and see what's working around that truck at the time. Technology is pretty amazing, and now these emergency vehicles can now actually talk to each other. So let's take a look at this particular situation. These are police vehicles that are being used, but they're parked at an incident scene. As the second vehicle approaches the first one, the emergency lights on both vehicles sync up so they're doing the same thing to create a little bit more organized and less disruptive type of emergency warning lights. So as the two units get close, they communicate with each other and they set up a pattern that's identical in both units to create a little bit less frantic type of emergency lighting at the scene. These technologies are available today, but you have to ask for them when you're speccing out your next fire apparatus, ambulance, chief's buggy, or whatever the case may be. Be sure to talk to the manufacturers about what's available and what you can put on your new vehicle. When we're talking about personal protective equipment, we want to make sure that personnel out on the roadway are wearing appropriate PPE. And in some places, if you are in what we call an OSHA plan state, OSHA requires that your department do a PPE hazard assessment in writing that tells the members what they are supposed to wear in various types of operations to meet the OSHA regulations and standards. Doesn't apply in every state in the country, but any OSHA plan state, the department should have an OSHA PPE hazard assessment in writing available should you be audited. Recommended minimums that we suggest are helmet or hard hat, depending on what kind of business you're in, your uniform or turnout gear, depending on the services that you're rendering or the actions that you're taking at the incident scene, and in many cases, ANSI high visibility garments so that people can see you and differentiate people from the emergency vehicles around them. There is an ANSI 107 standard for high visibility safety apparel. The most recent edition is dated 2020. And for those of you that are familiar with the ANSI standards, we used to have a standalone standard called ANSI 207 for what we referred to as a public safety vest. The public safety vest was a little bit shorter than the standard construction style vest. The ANSI 207 public safety vest still exists, but that ANSI standard has been folded into the ANSI 107 standard. So everything is under ANSI 107 now, and new vests are referred to as Type O, Type R, or Type P. For fire and EMS services, we recommend a Type R or Type P vest or garment. The Type P is what used to be the public safety vest. It's the same as a construction style vest, which is the Type R vest, but it's not as long. It only comes down to your utility belt. It was designed primarily for law enforcement and EMS to give you better access to the tools that you might be carrying on your utility belt. We also recommend that the Type R or Type P vest should be either a Class 2 or Class 3. So a Class 2 is a vest type garment with no sleeves. A Class 3 has to have sleeves on it. The more high visibility material available on the garment, the higher the class. So a Type R or Type P Class 3 will give you the most visibility in all conditions, daylight and nighttime conditions. Either way, if you're buying new PPE for high visibility garments, we recommend they meet the Type R or Type P Class 2 or Class 3. And we'd like to remind the fire service that these vests, for the most part, were not designed for proximity firefighting. You do not need to wear a high visibility vest over top of your turnouts when you're actively fighting fire, heat, flame, hazardous materials. Your turnout gear is appropriate at that particular point in time. We would hope that you would be operating in the shadow of a blocking vehicle, but at the same time, when you're fighting fire, it is not necessary nor required to wear a high visibility vest. When the fire's under control, you're wrapping up, loading hose back onto the truck, cleaning up around the area or whatever, then it's appropriate to be wearing a high visibility garment. But during the initial firefighting effort, it's not appropriate and not recommended. The other thing I want to call to your attention is when you're buying high visibility garments, we recommend that they be a contrast color from the vehicles that you're normally operating around. So in this particular case, the paramedic that you see here has high visibility gear where the color is coordinated with the same colors that they use on their emergency vehicles. In some cases, that will help you blend in with the emergency vehicles when we want you to stand out and be more highly visible. It would probably be better if this paramedic and their agency provided fluorescent red or fluorescent orange as the primary color for their PPE or their uniform or turnouts, whatever the case may be, as opposed to matching the color to the vehicle that they're working around. So try to pick a contrasting color If you're using red apparatus, you might want to go for lime green or yellow. If you're using yellow or a lighter colored apparatus, you might want either the fluorescent red or fluorescent orange as the primary color in your high visibility garments. The other area that we're starting to look at are helmets and head protection for roadway incidents. We've gotten a number of reports, as I indicated earlier, of firefighters and EMTs being injured at roadway incidents. In some cases, they're being struck by a vehicle. In some of those situations, they are wearing a helmet without a strap, chin strap in place, and the helmet comes off when they're struck and doesn't provide any protection for their head when it hits the ground. And in other cases, as you see in these pictures here, debris is kicked up off the roadway at incidents where firefighters and EMTs are actually operating. And we've had a number of cases where they've been struck by the debris coming up off the road. And in these particular cases, you're seeing bolts that were picked up and thrown by vehicles passing the incident scene. The one case, the helmet that you see on the right actually protected the firefighter who was wearing it at the time. You can see on the reflective marking, that's where the bolt hit. It came off of a guardrail that was damaged in the primary crash and then was kicked up by traffic passing by the incident scene and thrown and struck the firefighter in the side of the helmet. Unfortunately, not all those cases have worked out that way. And in some situations, the helmets just don't provide the type of protection that we need working at roadway incidents. So we're looking at the various types of designs and styles of helmets and head protection that are available out there today. And we really haven't found one designed appropriately for fire and rescue services that provides the right level of protection with all of the other features that we need when we're operating at an emergency scene on the roadway. We're talking to helmet manufacturers about the need and seeing what they can do to help us design a helmet that will provide more appropriate protection for personnel who are operating at roadway incidents or on the highway. Watch for more to come on this. The information that we've gathered and brought forth so far is available for free on our website at respondersafety.com. But I'm sure you'll hear more about this subject as time goes on. So when I teach these classes in person, I always end them with this quote coming from Harvey Grant's Vehicle Rescue book from back in 1975. It's one of the rescue books that I studied out of when I was in the business. Those that have died in highway crashes are gone. There's nothing we can do for them except mourn their passing. This book is dedicated to the living. There is much we can do for them. The task is monumental, and the effort starts with training. And I guess from my perspective, there's nothing I can do to bring firefighter Dave Good back to life after being killed at the incident on the Pennsylvania Turnpike in March of 1998. But the information that I'm sharing with you today and that we've shared over the last 20 years and continue to share on a regular basis, we hope will instigate you to make improvements or changes to your roadway response procedures in your departments, and maybe even improve or ratchet up the steps that you take to educate the community about how to operate safely around emergency vehicles on the roadways and operating at incident scenes. My email address is on the screen in front of you at respondersafety@gmail.com. Our website is respondersafety.com, and we have our learning network that are free training modules related to traffic incident management and responder safety at learning.respondersafety.com. If there are any questions that develop out of this particular presentation, please feel free to contact me by email. I travel quite a bit, so email is the best way to get an answer from me as quickly as possible, and I'll do what I can to point you in the right direction. I thank you for your time and attention today, and hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you.